We are recording. This is a very loose podcast, Mark, so rest assured.
Perfect.
Is there anything you don't want to talk about?
Politics and religion?
Fair enough. Okay. I think
politics intersect with zoning.
Yeah.
They do. That was a sarcastic
answer. Okay, cool. Cool. You want to just get after it then?
Sure thing.
Would love it.
Why don't you take us away?
All right. Welcome to The Word. Today we are joined by attorney Marc Lacasse from Lacasse Law, zoning development guru for the city of Boston, real estate attorney, and ferocious attorney in general. Ferocious. Yes, I would say.
That was kind of glowing from Brendan.
Yeah.
Tempered with mercy and good manners.
Yes.
I guess I should learn some of those traits.
Well, you know, they come with experience.
Oh, is that what it is? I think it's age more than experience. Patience.
That's why my beard is gray. I've earned it.
My hair looked like that this morning until I shaved it, so now it looks like I appear younger. But I don't.
You did that at home?
I did, because I had an appointment at 9 a.m. with my barber who canceled on me at 8:40. I was very happy.
Oh, so it was rage shaving?
Well, I had no option.
Yeah.
It was far too long.
Yeah.
So I had to take care of it. Anywho.
See, we digress, Mark, all the time.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Excited to talk some zoning and things today.
I am amazed that people actually have an interest in the topic of zoning when they figure out what it really is.
Interest might be the wrong word.
Mystified by?
That's much better. Yeah.
Want to know how to not get sued talking about it? There's probably all sorts of reasons that both of our listeners would be interested in this.
Very, very perplexed by zoning and the thoughts of it and the bureaucracy of it in general.
And it contradicts the fundamental principle that is instilled with us that a man's home is his castle. Right?
True.
As if you can do whatever you want.
Well, isn't that the most
home.
Sexist thing we've heard all day? What about a woman's home?
How about a person's home?
Or a gender-neutral part?
His, her, or they's castle.
The other day, I had the pleasure of...
Is castle racist?
Racist might not be the right word.
Derogatory?
I think castle...
Castle sounds like it could be like classist. It's classist for sure.
It's elitist.
Yeah. Ugh, we don't like castle. It should be abode.
All right, let's rephrase the original concept that was instilled with us. A person's home is his, her, or their
domain.
Abode.
Them.
Yeah.
Humble abode.
Humble.
Good work. That was good. I remember when you said you didn't want to talk about politics. Here we are. I think
there we go.
We're gonna jump on that third rail.
Let's get our handbook of phraseology out, so we use all the right terms.
Where's Martin? Yeah. I had the pleasure of joining a virtual ZBA meeting fairly recently. I will spare you the details.
In Boston?
It was not in Boston.
Okay.
It was a true delight. First off, I joined because I have a client who I represent, who is going through the zoning process. So I was just simply joining in, as an interested party to the transaction. B, want to, stay up to date. Even though it was still on the most recently published agenda, they were postponed, which I still don't understand how that works. So maybe you could tell me about that in a little bit. And then I listened to several people in arguably the most unprofessional manner of all time legitimately argue with hostility their case. It was something else.
Was this in a city or a town?
It's not important.
It doesn't matter, Brendan, because whether you're in a city or town, whether you're in this state or another state or anywhere in the country, you could drop in on a zoning type hearing of any sort that involves people's livelihoods and their homes, and you're going to get the same kind of crazy. It's remarkable. That's one thing that is consistent with these types of meetings and hearings in municipalities, is that at root they're all the same. They bring out the same type of behavior, and people think that
that's the truth.
Screeching, entitled.
No, it just people think that
inconsiderate
screeching and screaming is the way to get across a point in a civic proceeding.
It reminded me my tenure on the board of trustees at Atlantis Marina was really a delight, and I learned a lot. But it reminded me of sitting on a board that I no longer sit on.
That would be a condo board?
Yes, that's correct. And I joined because...
Oh, I forgot another piece of Mark's work, right? Do you still do condo board representation?
That's good to know.
I do for those who are existing clients, but
we're not taking new clients in this area.
Smart.
I tend to resist when I hear the initial part of a phone call from a prospective client being...
I represent the board.
Condo dispute, and it's already personal, right? Like those two go hand in hand, and even more so than zoning proceedings, condo boards and condo disputes are at root personal because it's people's abodes that we're talking about.
Their castles,
and money. Did I mention money is always an issue?
Really?
Oh, that motivates people to piss each other off.
It was so. We've talked a lot about NIMBYism, so to speak, and less so on the board of a condo association. But the whole thing was very interesting, and I think that what I was trying to get at is like the unfortunate shtick of hostility or coming from a place of negative intent. Better said.
Yeah.
Was really
big words today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just trying to level up here.
Yeah.
It was very similar. It was, but I also couldn't stop watching. It was something.
It's like crack. It's like Suits.
I thought you were going to remark on the composition of the board itself, which again is a whole other interesting topic. That is, all of these boards are volunteer positions, right? They're not elected;
Yes.
they're appointed. And the type of people that are drawn to these positions, unfortunately, are power seekers, perhaps, who view these positions as a way to exert power and influence in their community. And they come to these positions most of the time, or many times, with no underlying knowledge whatsoever about zoning, how it works, where it comes from, the legal principles underlying it. They have no clue, and they think it's just, a power grab with politics mixed in between as a way to control what happens in their community. And sadly, that plays out over and over again.
I think I concur with that.
100%.
No, there's always like
or aggrieved, right? Like someone that was, not treated well by that board that then makes it their mission to get on it and treat everybody else poorly.
I would say that there's
a lot of that.
Yeah. I feel like there's always like one or two people who are like highly skilled and deserve that seat, and their job eventually becomes the chair, and they are just trying to keep the rails together, everything on the rails. And
until they're not, though, like sometimes those people are just as dangerous.
Fair.
Having been the chair of the finance and advisory committee for like quite a while in Nahant,
you were
attest
probably
to that.
Dangerous.
When I wanted to be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But
the rules are fun sometimes.
There is, a problem that is facing such boards nationwide, local, state, and nationwide, and that is nobody wants to do it.
That's the truth.
Nobody wants to do it. So
no one wants to do anything, though, Mark. You and I were talking about this earlier, right? About voter apathy.
They don't even want to vote, let alone spend hours educating themselves on complex zoning matters or historic preservation matters or planning board matters or coastal environmental matters or anything that these boards regulate. They would have to educate themselves. They would have to study the cases before them. Yet
that sounds horrible.
Large percentages of people can't even bother to get up and go vote on, a Tuesday.
Can't you just have a feeling?
Year.
Like, I don't feel like that's a good project. Can't you just go in and be like, that sucks. I don't like that one.
Well, don't you think, and we're just really unpacking the zoning thing, and it'd be cool to talk about a couple specific things and try and get your take on them, but don't you think it's just far too much what's in it for me versus the greater good of a community?
That is what ends up happening at these hearings, because the parties who have the right to speak and express an opinion about a zoning case are abutters.
Right.
My least favorite word, abutter.
And who's, as an abutter, like, no one's happy with perpetual construction or renovation or redevelopment changing the landscape of the neighborhood where you plunk down your biggest investment more than likely. I get it.
And even if the abutter property got the same type of zoning relief that is being sought by the property next door, that doesn't matter because their next perspective is predictable, and I see it all the time. Well, I already have mine, and I was here first, so why do you think you can have yours?
Yeah.
Right? Like it's obvious to them that that's the solution. Well, I got my zoning relief from my property, so I could add a second or third floor onto my building, and you want to do the same? Hey, no way, buddy. I was here first. And they pose that as a logical argument.
Yeah. It's funny. I mean, and I'm sure your perspective is a little bit different being in the city, but I'm sure we can both speak to like just being on residentially lined streets. Like if someone locally tried to substantially change the physical landscape of the neighborhood, I'm sure I would be displeased. It's part of the reason and the allure that it drew me to that neighborhood. So I can see it from both sides. You know, there's places for denser housing and multiple units and whatnot, or, you know, if a neighbor wanted to do something and it turns out to block people's views of, you know, the water.
But you don't buy your view.
Right.
You buy your view. You don't own your view. You don't buy your view.
You could have bought
if you
because
wanted
of your
a view, you should have bought the house on the water. Not across the street from the water, on the water. Right? So you don't get the right to bitch about the person across the street that used to have a ranch that now wants to build a big house on the water. No, you could have bought the ranch. But guess what? You didn't spend enough money to buy the ranch because you're cheap. And you know.
But as an abutter, I truly do have the right.
Except you don't. Because the zoning code protects certain interests of abutters, like density and overcrowding and light and air. But one thing it does not protect is views. And it's a frequently litigated issue, but zoning codes do not protect views. It's not an interest that is legally protected by a zoning code. So if your view is being impaired by a project that is otherwise compliant with zoning, i.e. they're building to 30 feet and 30 feet is the allowed height, and that's going to block your view, the answer is too bad, because if it's otherwise zoning compliant and your sole objection is it's blocking my view, you're out of luck.
But why
so I have
would
to say it's blocking my sunlight is what I have to say at certain parts of the day.
Right. Then they're going to do shadow studies and they're going to show that it doesn't, and that you're making stuff up. And
but if it complies with the zoning, why are we in front of the ZBA? Are you talking about like maybe a site plan review or some other?
Some sort of relief required more than likely.
Yeah, something, because you, as I say,
a couple variances, not a litany.
Certainly in the city of Boston, I always say you can't change a doorknob without getting some form of relief of some sort, either historic commission or.
There's a racket.
You can't build a teeny tiny porch or deck without going to the zoning board of appeal. You can't,
or paint your front door.
Actually, color is not something that's regulated by historic commissions.
What about form of front door?
Absolutely.
Like steel and glass?
If it's an original front door that has historic significance, you can't change it.
Whose history? Isn't history subjective?
It is. I always say, ever been to Jerusalem? It's like a 6,000-year-old city. How many 6,000-year-old buildings are there in Jerusalem? None. How many 4,000-year-old buildings? None. How many 2,000-year-old buildings? None. Maybe a 900-year-old building that's been substantially changed over history.
And hopefully reinforced, because we just learned that they don't survive well in earthquakes.
They don't survive well.
Right. So we need to bring them up to code.
So, yeah, history is relevant, right? Because the entire South End or the Back Bay didn't exist prior to massive infill of what were formerly marshes, as if they would ever be able to do that today.
The conservation committee would have something to say about that.
Another bunch of assholes. Don't get me started on conservation committees.
We're going to infill the entire Back Bay from Arlington to Mass Ave and build 6 new city blocks. How about that, right? That would never. You can't fill.
We should just fill in the Charles River,
right?
No, I don't think we can, because then the whole city would flood and be a marsh again.
Oh, maybe they could just fill it
most of it
halfway on each side.
Only on the Boston side. Let Cambridge have their river,
it wouldn't be so hard to get to Cambridge if they did that. It's so hard to get to Cambridge. It's like 2 bridges, and that's the only way to get to Cambridge. People who live in Boston...
But why do you really want to go to Cambridge at the end of the day?
Food?
It's interesting. People who live in Boston never go to Cambridge, and people who live in Cambridge never go to Boston. It's like literally Kansas and, you know, the Great Divide, that New Yorker cartoon. People just don't cross the river. It's too hard. It's too hard.
And there's not a lot there.
When they closed the tunnel, I didn't really want to leave here. So I can understand.
Yeah, I didn't want to go anywhere. So that apocalypse has since ended, thankfully.
So let's I obviously we're super excited to have you on. That was like the biggest
intro.
The tangent of all time.
How'd you get into this?
That's also a good question to go back to.
Yeah. That's usually where we start. So this is not something that one just like plops into typically. Like I'm gonna pick up today and I'm gonna be a zoning lawyer. So how did we get to this point?
How did we get here?
Yeah.
Well, so let's see. So I've been doing this for 35 years.
Holy shit!
Scary. I know. I was at my law school alumni board meeting last night, and they were tossing out
another
board.
Nice.
This one was more friendly, and they serve pizza.
There you go.
35th class reunion coming up this fall. I can't believe it. But this is true. And started working at a firm that largely did litigation and became a litigator and argued cases in Superior Court and was sort of the appellate guy in the office. So argued all of the appeals to the state Supreme Court and the state appeals court on a wide variety of topics, all civil, no criminal work whatsoever. And my boss at the firm had been a Boston City Councilor at large for 12 years and was very politically connected still, and that was a large part of his business, including lobbying and advocating for clients' positions at City Hall, including, as it turns out, at the zoning board. And literally, he walked into my office one day, I don't remember what year, and said, "Would you have any interest in taking care of this zoning matter for me at the ZBA?" And I said, "Sure."
How hard could it be?
What could go wrong?
But as it turns out, because I'm sort of a law school geek, I had really enjoyed land use and zoning when I took the class, and had served on zoning boards of appeals in 2 different towns that I lived in. So I had, at the time, about 7 years of experience on local zoning boards, including 5 years as the chairman of the zoning board in the town of Harvard, where I lived, because I attended one meeting and they said, "Oh my God, he actually knows something about this."
Like, isn't it weird how I predicted that?
Yeah. How would you like to be the chairman?
That guy knows what's up. Let's make him in charge.
Has pulse, not going to say no.
Right. So I knew a few things about zoning, although Boston is very different, and we'll explain that. So I took that first zoning case and sort of realized that my boss was actually foregoing a lot of business opportunity, because what I saw was a huge need and a very small handful of people who actually knew anything about how it works. Right? You can read the zoning code cover to cover, Article 1 through Article 90, all 4,000 pages of it in Boston.
Still be confused.
And still have only about half the knowledge that you need to get through the process, because all the rest is just out there. It's all the unwritten policies and procedures and customs and practice and politics and sharp elbows and all that kind of stuff that you just got to figure out over time. So I saw a terrific opportunity and started to build a client base and meet developers and architects, who are always the source of business, because those are the people that need zoning relief. And lo and behold, this many, I think 15 plus ish years later, since that first day that I was asked, it's pretty much all I do is zoning in the city of Boston.
Sorry, I guess I should have just asked for your pen.
It's all good. Yeah.
And the reason I stick to just the city of Boston is because there are 351 cities and towns in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. 350 are governed by one set of zoning laws, which is called Chapter 40A, the State Zoning Act. And then there's Boston. Literally a separate statute applies to zoning in the city of Boston. It's called the Enabling Act of 1956, which led to the first implementation of the Boston Zoning Code in 1965. And Boston Zoning Enabling Act and Code is very different than all 350 cities and towns in the Commonwealth. So every so often you'll see a non-Boston practitioner come before the Boston zoning board and they start like talking and you're like, oh, you're not doing it right. You're not doing it right.
Jeez.
Yeah. So Boston is unique in many ways, not just it's a big city, unlike all the other cities and towns, but its laws are literally one of a kind.
And there's, from what I understand, because I don't do any of this, but there are different organizations that exist in many cities and towns too, right? Like you've already talked about the historic commissions, you've talked about zoning boards. And I don't know what it's called now. It used to be called the BP.
Oh, it was the BRA.
Boston
Redevelopment Authority. Now it's called the Boston Planning and Development Agency.
And that's where everything happens, right?
That's where the big stuff happens.
Okay. So give us a little rundown of like typical project, like where you're going to be, who you're going to talk to.
So if your project is fewer than 15 units and less than 20,000 square feet, you're not going to go to the BPDA, the Boston Planning and Development Agency. Your project is too small for that process to be applicable. It's called Article 80. It's a whole separate part of the zoning code that governs development review of small projects, which is 15 or more dwelling units, up to 50,000 square feet, large projects, which is 50,000 square feet or more, and then things like institutional master plans, like Boston University, Northeastern University, hospitals that have huge campuses. They have a whole separate process for that.
And do you do all this?
I do.
Wow.
I do.
Okay, these are lots of
small
words that you must have read.
And large project review and acronym soup and yes, BPDA.
And asses to kiss?
The funny part about the BPDA rebranding to that acronym is that BRA, Boston Redevelopment Authority, was created by state statute way back in the day when they were given these huge powers to redevelop the city of Boston. And then they decided that authority was not the right tone to convey. So they came up with Boston Planning and Development Agency, BPDA. But then they realized that because it was statutory, they really couldn't change their name because it was a legal entity.
So it's a DBA?
So on legal documents, it says Boston Redevelopment Authority, BRA, DBA, doing business as BPDA. So it's BRA, DBA, BPDA. Got it?
Who did that? Who renamed this place?
That was done during the Walsh administration.
It was. That's unlike Marty. I loved Marty.
It was all well-intentioned.
I miss Marty.
They just,
When's Marty coming back? He loved building.
Yes, he did love building.
He loved building.
It was his union.
Bring back Marty.
His union background of, what do those cranes and scaffolding in the sky represent?
Jobs.
And
housing.
And housing. Indeed.
Is housing necessary, Mark? Do we need housing around here?
So the BPDA handles all the big stuff under Article 80. And then if your project is smaller than that, chances are, because Boston zoning is antiquated in many ways and
really
very
shocked to
zoning
hear this.
Antiquated, same sentence.
Restrictive. You have to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals, which in most cities and towns is called the ZBA, Zoning Board of Appeal.
So is this BRA, DBA, BRPDA at the ZBA?
Sort of, except that internally at the ZBA, they call themselves the BOA, Board of Appeal.
Oh, right.
AKA, not Bank of America.
AKA ZBA.
AKA ZBA.
Got it. All right.
BOA, AKA.
Hope everyone's really clear on what we're talking about.
ZBA, not to be confused with BRA, DBA, BPDA.
Right.
Ready?
Or BOA. Yeah,
is that the one where the guy was taking bribes that was the realtor in Dorchester?
Close.
Okay. Which one was that?
Well, there was...
not person, which board?
Yeah, there was a scandal involving an employee of the BPDA.
Okay.
Who
was not on the ZBA?
Who's not on the ZBA, but was implicated and pled guilty or was found guilty. I can't remember what the disposition was of accepting a $50,000-ish bribe from a developer in order to...
You know why they take bribes? Because it's fucking hard to get anything through, so you got to pay people. If they just got rid of all this shit, no, I don't do it. But like if they made it easy, no one would have to bribe anybody.
Right. And I think in that case, they tried to characterize it as a referral commission or something like that.
Right.
Crafty.
But the referral commission was delivered in small bills in cash in a manila envelope in the front seat of a car that happened to have an FBI surveillance camera
like
in
up the bra?
So
is it like up the shirt?
It's generally not how real estate commissions are paid. So
really?
That particular employee had a problem.
Do you remember up the bra?
I do remember that case. Yes,
so
indeed.
good.
She ran.
I know. I was hoping she'd get reelected.
She ran to be reelected last year, but no can do.
The federal sentence didn't play well for the voters.
But on the case that you were talking about, nobody at the ZBA was implicated in that case.
That was a BPDA case.
BPDA employee who was.
But it was a Southie development, wasn't it?
I believe
a project around the corner from you.
I believe that was a case in South Boston. Yes.
So let's just reeling it in here.
Yeah. Reel it in.
What would you say some of the like typical cases you do handle, and then what are some of the largest issues you run into as being a zoning attorney?
So my caseload has ranged from everything as small as a single-family home. Single-family home renovations in the city frequently require zoning relief of some sort because they're perhaps converting unutilized basement space or attic space into what will be living area. So they're going to trigger zoning relief for that. To the largest project I've worked on, which is Ink Block in the South End, a 7-building project that started in 2012 and just finished construction of building number 7 last year. So I was working on that project for literally 10 years.
Seems like not a very good billable issue there.
No, big retainer maybe.
Yeah.
Hugely successful project.
I like that Whole Foods.
The Whole Foods is one.
They used to have LA parking. Do they still?
Are there tunnels? There's tunnels there, right?
No tunnels.
No tunnels.
No
Someone told me there was tunnels there.
No tunnels. Well, there's sort of, you can go under the expressway, and there's a huge, beautiful park called the Underground at Ink, which is paid for by National Development, the developer of Ink Block. It's this beautiful park that has basketball courts and a dog park and landscaping, and they have, beer garden type events. It's amazing what you can do with the underbelly of an expressway if you
underbelly's a great word.
Put some money into it. But that's sort of under the expressway across the street from Ink Block.
How's the lighting?
It's very good.
It's good, so you don't
lighting,
get
good security cameras.
Good.
They private patrol the area. It's amazing. It's a hugely successful urban park environment under a highway.
Right. Useless space previously, probably dangerous previously. Lighting is a huge issue
it was
for
like
crime.
A storage area for the State Department of Transportation for the Big Dig for 20 years. It's just like a dumping ground, and now it's a dog park and people are shooting hoops. So it's pretty cool. So that was Ink Block, amazing project, 7 buildings, 400 plus units of housing, a 50,000 square foot Whole Foods, which is one of the top grossing Whole Foods in the country.
Wow.
Enormously successful
restaurants.
You
build a city around it.
Street level restaurants and retail space, literally creating a village from what used to be the place that they published the Boston Herald until it closed, and then it sat vacant. And I remember taking a client who was interested in buying a condo in the city, and Ink Block hadn't even started construction yet. I think they had just started to take down the Boston Herald building, and they were a couple from the North Shore who were, empty nesters and wanted to downsize and move into the city, into an exciting new neighborhood. And I thought, Ink Block would be perfect for them. There'll be a grocery store, brand new condo buildings with amenities. What's not to like? And we drove over to that part of the South End and parked the car, and they were like, you expect us to get out of the car?
Crazy.
As compared to, what it looks
what
like
it is
today.
now, yeah.
So that vision thing and I remember when I moved to Washington Street deep in the South End in 2002, and took my boss to see the building that I was going to move into, which is called Wilkes Passage. And there were, all the 1,000 units of new housing on that stretch of Washington Street got built in a 5-year period of time. And we were standing on Washington Street, and the sidewalks were under construction, and the street was all dug up for, new pavement coming and new bus lanes. And he just looked up and down the street and said, "Why on earth would you ever want to live down here?"
How much did you pay for that unit?
$380,000.
Jesus was like Christ.
Early 2000s?
Yeah.
2002.
Yeah.
And what do you think that unit trades? The last time it traded, what did it trade for?
What was the square footage?
950 square feet in a cool new loft building.
1,200 a square foot.
And I think the last time it changed hands, it sold for just shy of $1 million.
Wow.
989 or something like that. Same unit that I bought in 2002. But I sold that and moved across the street to Rollins Square. A year later, another new development that the Archdiocese of Boston had done, mixed income, 184 unit complex. That was an amazing property. Lived there for 8 years and then sold that and moved to Southie in 2011 when Southie was sort of a thing and started to, I was reluctant to leave the South End, but we did, and I don't regret it at all.
I think 2011 statistically was the best year to buy real estate. Fun fact.
It was the tail end of the recession, and everything had been beaten down pretty thoroughly in 2000.
It's really before South even popped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were definitely one of the first people there.
Well, when my husband and I announced to people that we were leaving the South End and moving to Southie, it was just met with surprise and shock. What? Why? Why would you move to Southie? And at that point in my life, I had lived in Boston for 32 years and had probably been to Southie or that part of Southie where we moved to maybe twice.
Right.
Like, why would you go to Southie? Happy to say it's changed very much. It's a very welcoming neighborhood. It's really exciting to see young families and people walking their dogs and new construction and new development.
But the young families shouldn't stay too long. They should sell and buy big houses in the suburbs.
That's usually what happens. Yeah. That's part of the pattern.
And they should hire Seth to do it.
I think they're staying. I think a lot of people are trying to stay.
But isn't it more expensive to pay for the tuition at, a $50,000 a year kindergarten than to move to Weston?
I mean,
it is.
Maybe.
Right? Over time.
It's frequently a pattern I see in my transaction practices, young couple buy a 1 or 2 bedroom condo in Southie or the South End.
5-year run.
4 or 5 years later, I get the call. We're selling our unit. I'm like, how old's your child?
Right.
Just about to start kindergarten.
4.5.
Yeah.
We looked at the schools. We didn't get into the one we wanted to because there's intense competition to get your kid in. The few of the Boston public schools that are actually decent, the rest are not. And if you don't hit the lottery or however get your kid into a Boston public school that's performing and is a good school, you move. You move to the suburbs. You sell your unit and you move to the suburbs where they have good schools and your taxes are higher perhaps, but you don't have to pay.
Yeah, it's all a wash.
$50,000. Or perhaps not.
Or perhaps not. There are some towns that have amazing bargains considering the school systems that they have.
In Boston, they have the resident exemption, but the taxes aren't like free in Boston.
They're not bad though.
They're not bad. Taxes in Boston compared to other cities of this size are not bad because of
commercial
financial district.
Yeah.
Well, we'll make a note of that because we'll talk about what's going to happen in the next 2 years with Boston's tax revenue because of.
Well, this is a great segue. We might as well start talking about it now.
So, I think I've given the high enough level of zoning. So zoning in Boston, it controls what use you can put your property to, i.e. residential, commercial, what kind of business, what kind of residential use, single family, 2 family, 3 family, multifamily. So use broadly is regulated, and then dimensions are broadly regulated. So what is zoning? If someone said, what is zoning in 2 words, I would say use and dimensions. What can you use it for, and how big can it be? How tall, how dense, where, side yard, front yard, rear yard, setbacks. That's broadly what zoning regulates, is the use of property and the dimensions of the property. So back to a person's home is their abode. Not so much. Subject, of course, to
the abutters.
To the abutters and Articles 1 through 90 of the Boston Zoning Code, which says what you can use your property for. Maybe you can have a home office, maybe not.
So hypothetically, if you had a small office in East Boston that was zoned for an antique store, would that be an issue?
It depends. The answer is always it depends. Zoning codes are so mind-numbingly complex, and frequently there is no answer, right? You search high and low, you look at all the footnotes. The answer is always
What
in
if
the
there was a
footnotes.
decision from the ZBA in 1994?
It was to change its use, though, from office to antique. Hypothetically.
Hypothetically, it might not matter because the change of use might have been necessitated by the antique shop, but the use from which it came, office, might be otherwise currently allowed.
Interesting.
So that's okay. You can always go from, you can always change a use to something that's allowed. It's when it's not allowed or conditional that you need to seek relief from the zoning board. But
So
I love.
So hypothetically, it could revert.
It could revert. Yeah, you could look it up in the table of uses.
Yeah, I can't wait to do that.
And the table of uses.
He's not kidding, actually.
The table of uses will show uses that are allowed, denominated by the letter A, conditional, letter C, or the dreaded F, forbidden. But if you look in your table of uses,
Is F always F?
F is always forbidden. Yep.
You can't even get a variance for an F?
You can get a varience for an F.
Oh, so it's not always F.
Well, it's harder
via the SP.
In theory. But
SP's better.
SP is a special permit, which exists in every other city or town except Boston.
Oh, there's no SP.
There's
What's
no
SP in Boston?
SP is C, conditional.
C. Oh.
Conditional use is functional equivalent.
We could have a whole new alphabet.
SP.
We could.
We could talk about all the agencies that are required to review your application in Boston. First, you start at ISD.
Can't we just hire you to do that?
Then you go to the ZBA, aka BOA.
Can we talk about FAR for a minute?
There's another acronym. Then you have to go to the BPDA, doing business as something else. And then you got to go to the PIC and the PWD to get your curb cut permit. And then you got to go to the SELDC if you live in the South End to get your
this
historic
sounds
approval.
so affordable. Right? So, like, I'm hearing you, and all I hear is my bill's going up, my bill's going up, my bill's going up.
The bureaucracy.
Right? So, we're in this, like, affordable housing kick, right? Where we don't have enough affordable housing. Has anybody thought that we make it unaffordable to build housing? Like, is anybody talking about that? Michelle, if you're listening, I know I saw you at Angela's at breakfast the other day. You are making it more unaffordable. Stop. Let go.
Which, by the way, someone's for like 15 units over recently. You know that, right?
Over Angela's?
Yeah.
They're going to still be there, though, right?
No, that brick that's above it.
Yeah.
My camera just died. Oh. That brick that's above it just is a new layer. It's like a whole new
building?
Yeah, they just tacked onto it.
Good.
Resi units.
Yeah.
Made it conform with the neighborhood. Anywho.
Do you want to check your camera before we go much further?
I do.
Okay.
We've talked about
well, we've gotten a lot of primer on zoning.
We have.
Yeah, I feel like we talked about a lot.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a much better way to talk about complex projects because there's sort of the human element that people are like, yeah, I think I understand.
Told you it'd be very casual.
Yeah, and just the more general rule is no matter what you're doing, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. It's my philosophy. If you're not having fun, you're not doing it right.
Oh, I agree.
100%.
Even if it's zoning.
This whole thing is like a vanity project for us. Like we do it because we like to learn this shit, right? Like we're like, oh, what kind of interesting topics could we talk about next?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about is housing unaffordable. That was where we were just going right now. Yeah. So let's talk about that.
The broader observation on that I was sharing with Brendan earlier is not so much that we don't have enough affordable housing or that we have a housing affordability crisis, which is how the issue is typically portrayed. The issue is we don't have enough housing.
Period.
Of all
full stop.
Types. Period. Full stop.
Agreed.
We don't have enough affordable housing. We don't have enough moderately affordable housing. We don't have enough middle market housing. We don't have enough sort of expensive housing.
But know what we have, Mark?
And we don't have enough luxury housing.
We have 4,000 pages of the Boston zoning code. You know what that does? That makes housing less affordable because someone has to pay Mark to read 4,000 pages and then do all the applications to every acronym you just talked about, go to all those committees, sit there, probably be the third or fourth person on the agenda that night.
How about the 67th?
Or the 67th? How much does that cost? And I can't imagine with your experience that your hourly rate is like real low. So like I can't imagine the development that took 10 years, like how affordable it was for them to get the relief that they needed.
Yeah, it's epically restrictive.
Coming back to the bribe thing, I was kind of kidding about the bribes. Like, they only do bribes because it's complicated. If it was easy and it didn't cost a lot of money, no one would be bribing anybody because there'd be no one to say no. It'd probably cost the government less, too, because we wouldn't need all these idiots and all these committees doing all this stuff and working for all these agencies.
Brendan likes to go on rants.
Yes.
So, although it obviously doesn't immediately make housing unaffordable, it is so overly complex and long that I think it stops people from doing the process for a multitude of reasons, and therefore creates less housing, and therefore housing is less affordable.
Yeah, so you asked, let's talk about FAR, right?
Yeah, because you mentioned single family in the city, basement, attic, conversion of space. A lot of that's, my understanding, is FA. I don't even know what FAR stands for.
Floor area ratio,
right? So,
which is the relationship between the lot size and how much square footage can be on that lot. So super.
And why does that matter?
That's how we
because
regulate.
It was important in 1968.
Right. That's how we regulate density. When you hear people complain about density, what they're talking about is FAR.
And these are people that live in cities.
People
right?
who live
We're
in
not talking
cities.
about Boxford, where you need a 2-acre lot. We're talking about the South End or the Back Bay, which is dense.
But for example, if you have a lot that was 5,000 square feet and you were in a zoning district that had an FAR of 1.0, you could build 5,000 square feet of living area on your 5,000 square foot lot. So maybe that's 3 units on a 5,000 square foot parcel, which in a dense urban environment is just preposterous. So we point our fingers at the suburbs, wealthy suburbs like Weston and Wellesley, and say they have exclusionary zoning because they have large minimum lot size requirements of 1 acre or more, and that's exclusionary, and it keeps poor people from moving into those cities and towns, and it's a terrible, terrible thing, and it's so exclusionary. Boston functionally has the same thing in the form of restrictive FARs. In dense urban neighborhoods, some of the neighborhoods in the city of Boston have FARs of 0.3 or 0.4 or 0.5. So that is, if you had a 5,000 square foot lot and the FAR was 0.5, you could build 2,500 square feet of living area on a 5,000 square foot parcel. That is it's common.
The suburb is lower.
Right, in the suburbs it's even lower. Yeah. But to have FARs of less than 1.0, which is ridiculous in the city, but to have 0.5, 0.4, 0.3 is the functional equivalent of 2-acre minimum zoning in the suburbs, which we
Boxford
wildly criticize as exclusionary, yet
we're doing the same thing.
We're doing the same thing in the city of
Boston. We couldn't even build the city of Boston today.
No, God,
you could not build Beacon Hill.
Towns.
You couldn't build the Back Bay. You couldn't build the South End. You couldn't build Southie. Can't build Nahant.
You definitely can't build Winthrop.
Definitely not.
If you did an FAR analysis of most buildings, existing buildings in the city of Boston, based on the FAR that is permissible under the zoning code in that neighborhood, you would find that probably the vast majority of buildings already exceed the FAR. And now we're talking about trying to add to buildings to create more housing when it's all about FAR, restrictive FAR, which prevents the construction of dense, more affordable housing. Okay, here's a great trivia question. What's the most affordable, densest city in the world?
Oh, geez.
London.
I was going to say it's probably like Dubai.
Tokyo.
That was close.
Tokyo. Why? Tokyo is the densest, most affordable city in the world because it is the densest city in the world, right? There's a lot of housing in Tokyo, a whole lot. They build more housing in Tokyo than there are people, such that it ends up being affordable. So Tokyo is the densest, most affordable city in the world because they embrace density.
Right. Through necessity.
Through necessity.
But nonetheless, we shouldn't wait for it. We shouldn't shouldn't wait for us to get there. What I find really interesting right now, and then I want to talk about the financial district and what's coming down the pipe there, like how many new developments are coming. Think Revere Beach as a great example, completely redeveloped. And
still going.
And still going. And East Boston's similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously right in my backyard here. Rentals. They're all rentals. But the vast majority of them are rentals, right? So
but that's a financing issue, not a zoning issue.
Right. That is presently a financing issue.
What do you mean by that?
Banks won't lend money for condos. They're only lending money for apartments because of the return on investment.
I think even... Well, some of these go back years. Do you think that's more recently, or do you think that's years back?
I think it's a general rule of thumb for banks because they know their money's tied up for 10 years, 20 years versus a year and a half.
The way I've been looking at it is that it's almost by design because they know housing is such at a supply issue. Let's not build housing for sale. Let's build something for permanent, perpetual reuse that has a significantly better long-term return, which, by the way, perpetuates a housing ownership issue. That's been my point of view on it.
Yeah.
You're saying it's more driven by
finances,
bank lending.
Yeah.
And not just bank, but who lends money to developers to build property? Pension funds, union pension funds, large governmental pension funds. So they're looking for a long-term rate of return. And what better than to build a 200-unit building where people are going to be paying rent for years and years and years and years and years. So that's a nice investment for a pension fund to have.
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the financial district and what you had just previously mentioned.
Yeah, so generally taxes in Boston are, not that bad for a city of its size, and you get the residential exemption if you own and live in your house, which this year, for example, was worth about $3,600 off your tax bill. So that's a pretty good give back if you are owning your property and living in the city and contributing to your neighborhood. But the reason they're able to do that in Boston is because of the huge commercial tax base, most visibly represented by the financial district, right? The tall buildings filled with,
empty space.
Used to be filled with office workers who travel into the city and spend money in the city every day. And the value of those buildings for tax purposes is based upon the rental income of the commercial space. So this happened back in 2008, 9, and 10, where the value of commercial buildings is not like a residential property where it's worth X, right? And it's worth X even in bad times. It's based upon the income stream of the building. So a lot of these buildings are experiencing vacancy rates of 30% or more, depending on the quality of the building, such that when they are reassessed for tax purposes next year and the following year, those assessments are going to plunge based upon the vacancy of the buildings and the lower income derived therefrom.
That sounds like a crisis.
So that what happens then? So
Resi tax hike.
But you can only raise the taxes on the residential 2.5%, right, without an override?
Right, across the whole city. But there are other ways to manipulate that.
Oh, do tell.
Yeah, with
we love manipulation. Tell us.
Well, valuations.
Right.
But the whole levy can't raise more than 2.5%.
But it can.
through new growth.
I just remember my taxes once in Boston went up like 40% in 1 year. And I thought, how is this possible? It is.
It is for an individual owners to go up, but the whole levy that as my time on the finance committee, the whole town's tax collection, except for new growth, can't go up by more than 2.5%.
Without an override.
Without an override. They can reallocate owner by owner, where mine could go down and yours could go up 27%.
Right.
And they can reallocate as between commercial and residential.
Correct.
That's
where the killer is going to
comes, right? So if Boston suddenly has $1 billion less in tax revenue because the financial district is 30% or more vacant, they're not just going to say, oh, the budget for the city of Boston was $4 billion last year, but we're $1 billion short on tax revenue this year. So let's just cut the budget to $3 billion. That never happens.
No.
Oh, I bet that's going to make housing more affordable.
Oh, it's totally more affordable, right? So it's
what a disaster.
It's percolating, and I remember back in 2009 and 10, reading articles about it and sort of, oh, this is going to be a problem. And what was the reaction from city government at the time? Do nothing.
Right? No, better. More restrictions.
More restrictions.
Make it harder.
Make it harder. So, yeah, against that backdrop, we are now hearing proposals to increase the affordability requirement on new development projects from 13 to 20%.
Stop.
Doesn't that reduce the tax levy anyway?
It does reduce the tax levy because affordable units...
So perpetuating the problem.
Affordable units, of course, not only pay a lower tax rate, but let's say, for example, an affordable 2-bedroom unit is going to be allowed to be sold for $300,000. Whereas if it was a market rate unit, it would be worth $1.1 million. But under the, ready for another acronym? IDP, Inclusionary Development Policy, in the city of Boston, there are predetermined price points. So let's say that 2-bedroom unit is going to sell for $300,000 to someone fortunate enough to be selected to buy the affordable unit. All right, $300,000 is the value for tax purposes of that unit. In Boston, the tax rate, rule of thumb, is about $10 per 1,000 of value. So on a $300,000 unit with a $10 per 1,000 tax rate, what's the annual tax bill?
$3,000.
$3,000. And what did
I knew that.
What did I tell you the residential exemption value was?
$3,600.
It's $3,460.
So what is your tax bill if you own
do you get a rebate?
IDP unit?
Do you get a rebate?
You don't get a rebate, but you don't pay any taxes.
Nice.
Zero.
Wait, can we talk? I just thought of something.
So you get a reduced market rate to purchase your home at $300,000. Then you pay no taxes. And then if your unit is in a condo building, which it's going to be in the city of Boston, your condo fee is set at an artificially low percentage.
That was what I was going to ask.
Yet you're consuming the same common expenses as
everybody else. Is it in all
else.
of them? I had a client in Rollins Square with a affordable unit. And I remember their condo fee was like horrifyingly expensive.
Yeah, they might have missed the boat at Rollins Square.
Okay, so some of the older ones, you can buy an affordable unit but not be able to afford
your condo
fee.
That's right, because you're in a large residential complex that has an on-site property manager with an underground parking garage, with a ventilation system that is very costly, and hot water circulator pumps, and dreaded elevators in multiple buildings, and landscaping, and
deferred maintenance,
and on it goes, right? So who's going to pay that condo fee if
everybody else,
the other unit owners?
That's right. That's right. So your IDP neighbor is paying no taxes to the city of Boston, and they're paying a greatly reduced condo fee to pay for all the services that everybody else is. Not that that should engender any kind of negative feeling, but it's just a reality of this is a really good deal, right? If you get an affordable unit, first of all, you have to get through the process. There's a story actually in the Globe today of a couple of folks who tried to buy affordable units in the city of Boston. Mind-numbingly complex and arduous process. It can take over a year.
We have clients that call us all the time because the broker on the other end is refusing to co-broke or not answering these inquiries. So they call us for assistance to try and find out. And they've been selected as like a lottery winner, whatever you want to call it. It's been crazy. I think for me, the affordable housing, all the stuff you said, super factual, right? And I'm sure there's people listening that are like, how dare they say that these things shouldn't happen, right? Well, at the end of the day, what frustrates me is, like, home ownership is the key to wealth at the end of the day. So you perpetuate the lack of equity for that person by uncapping their hypothetical appreciation of that property, right? So we've all seen the slide, or hopefully all seen the slide. It's like the homeowner net worth is like $200,000 to $300,000. The renter's net worth is $11K. And at the end of the day, when you cap appreciation because of an affordable unit, they're just simply a renter. Let's be clear.
Although they are entitled to a 4 or 5% annual increase in the price of their unit when they go to resell it, which in some cases, if they hold on to it for 10 years, can be a pretty decent appreciation. It's not the same bump that you might get in the market, but it's not bad.
Do you get the market or do you get that automatically?
It's part of the deed restriction is that you have to apply for a resale certificate, and the city has to certify the maximum resale price. You have to go to the BPDA for that.
The fact that you even have to do that is silly.
You have to pay all these people, making it unaffordable. If we just got rid of all the restrictions, it'd probably be a lot more affordable.
Perhaps so.
And those people would have
a very legal
appreciation.
Answer. Yeah.
And again, I think that the concept of creating housing that is more affordable for folks that can only afford to purchase at that price point is a good thing in theory, but in practice, it's super complicated. And I've had a few clients over the years that have been fortunate enough to be selected to purchase affordable units in the city of Boston. And it truly, if you think applying for a mortgage as a normal human being is a difficult thing, try buying an IDP unit in the city of Boston and getting a mortgage for that. It is arduous beyond
fitting into like
mind-numbing.
Such a convoluted box that allows you to qualify for the program and also qualify for a mortgage at the same time, because you can't have too much money, but you have to have some money. So you can't be too poor, but you can't be too rich, and you have to make just enough money but not too much money, and it depends on the size of your house. And
just
you have
enough
to have a
money in the
payment.
bank, but not too much money in the bank. And you have to have some amount in your retirement savings, but not too much in your retirement savings. Do you know how many Goldilocks buyers like that are out there?
There are
four. There are four in the entire city. And it's just not the right way to do affordable housing.
Related but unrelated. Even on the news yesterday, there was something about there's a bill around right now, more specifically about the savings that you can have in the bank if you're on Social Security. So like there's some restriction right now where you can't have more than $2,000 in savings.
That's a Medicare thing.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like, so there's all there's just all these. The reason I bring that up is this perpetual.
Yeah, why are you bringing that up?
There's the perpetual restriction on wealth for folks who I think we're supposed to be helping.
Well, we're supposed to be they're poverty-based programs, right? So Medicare is a poverty-based program, and they don't want you to have any money.
Listen,
if you had money, they want you to use it to fund your own health care.
I'm not trying to switch this to Medicare, to be clear. I don't know when that bill passed.
I think that's been in existence for a long time.
I think FDR did that one.
So yeah, and $2,000 was the number then.
Maybe.
I think that's adjusted,
but it hasn't
point.
Adjusted.
It's the perpetual restriction of old rules, and laws, whatever you want to call it.
Of course, what is the natural consequence of that is, what a surprise. People come up with ways to
cheat the system,
get around the $2,000 limitation by creating fancy things like trusts and giveaways to their children.
5-year look-backs. 5-year look-backs.
Giving away their money, but not really, because they still have access and control over it.
Oh, you can't have control. You can't have control.
Yeah, they can have
You have to have an independent third party.
Right.
Like if you're looking for an updated estate plan, please reach out.
We happen to do those.
Yeah.
Geez. Okay.
You know what this pisses me off about this?
Oh, please. Is this going to be another rant?
No, but sellers, right? So say you have a 2-family on P Street in South Boston, and this has been in your family for years, and maybe you don't know, maybe it could be a 3-family, maybe you could put another floor on it, but those people aren't going to be able to pay to get a lawyer, to go to the ZBA, to get the approvals, so that they could make more money when they sold that property. The system is so complicated that the average person can't do it by themselves, and they can't reap the benefits.
Well,
so if you had a good realtor, right? Say you had a good realtor who has a relationship with a guy like you, who knows and can look at that and say, if we brought Mark in and Mark got you zoning relief and we sold this for X instead of Y, that X amount of dollars that you spent to get the zoning relief is going to pay for itself multiple times. But, there's no ability for the average person to comprehend this. And unless you're really, really involved in this world as either a realtor, I know you said that a lot of times the architects and the builders bring you in, or the developers, but like the realtor should also know this, right? So like if they're talking to somebody who's got a family generational home that they're selling, like maybe talk to a guy like you before you list that. Like there may be several better uses that would net your client significantly more money.
Yeah, and if you happen to be like a neighbor of mine in South Boston, like about 5 years ago, who had a single family home and a vacant parcel of land next door that her dad had bought for $300 because it was vacant and had been acquired through a tax foreclosure by the city of Boston. So she had the single family home and a vacant buildable lot right next door, right? So she's thinking, well, it's time to sell the house. And so, hey, Mac, right? What can I do here? And I was like, well, if you partnered with a developer and structured your purchase and sale agreement such that if you and the developer partner to take the project through the approval process, because you've lived here for 3 generations and you know all the abutters and you're going to be able to talk to them about helping your project get approved by the Zoning Board of Appeal. And if you get approval for X number of units, the purchase price is going to be this. And if you get a couple more units, the purchase price is going to be even higher. So it incentivizes the seller homeowner who's been in the neighborhood for many years to work in tandem with the developer who will then do the project. And I've seen it work very successfully in many cases.
So if our realtors or listeners, had an idea like that, or thought maybe they could do that, or are you a good contact for them to reach out to have those discussions?
As long as it's in Boston.
Yeah, as long as it's in Boston.
Yeah, if it's in Boston, absolutely. But some people don't have the time.
Well, that's what I was writing down, like
patience and stomach for it, right? They're selling the house for one of the many reasons that people sell homes. There's been a life transition. Somebody has died.
They saw a great place in Weymouth.
Somebody has been married. Somebody has been divorced. Somebody has had a new baby. Somebody's child has moved on to college, right? There's a bazillion reasons.
The W's?
It's the D's. He's hit all of it. It's death, diamonds, divorce, degrees, diapers, and I've added debt.
Right? There's so many reasons.
60s now.
So if someone is selling their 2-family with a vacant parcel that comes with their property, but they're doing it because their spouse just died and they really just need to move on, they're probably not going to have the stomach for a 9 to 15 month process of hearings and meetings and going door to door to their abutters and saying, hey, I'd really like your help. They're not going to have the tolerance for that. And they're going to say to Mr. or Mrs. Developer, here, just take it. How much money will you give me for it? And good luck to you. And maybe the developer will do something. Well, I think will do something, but the homeowner doesn't have the fortitude and the time to do it.
How much do you think? I completely agree with you guys. How much do you think of part of the issue there is like the transparency of what is possible in zoning? As you mentioned, I think it's 400 or 4,000 pages, like
4,000.
Like I have something going on right now that I dove into the Swampscott zoning code for the better part of a couple hours. I think it's only a couple hundred. It's like 200 to 300 pages. And at the end of the day, I still had to call an attorney who has zoning expertise, and I like kind of get it, right? So like, how much of this from if you're that homeowner, right? Technology or not, why is it so difficult to just simply look up what is possible, and how do I not know that? And do you think that also compounds to this redevelopment problem that we're in? Because to your point, sure, that person probably just wants closure, right? Selling the house that they grew their family in or whatever, right? And they just want to move on and go somewhere else. So, but if at least there was some simple cross-check that was easier, don't you think that maybe they would make a more informed decision?
Yes, but the zoning code's much like
ain't ever gonna happen. We should write that software. We'd be wealthy.
much like the Internal Revenue Code or figuring out whether your grandmother qualifies for Medicare or Medicaid or
but how much
whatever.
savings does she have?
And how much savings does she have? And does she have a trust?
When were the transfers made?
Irrevocable trust or whatever kind of trust. It is mind-numbingly complex, and probably the kinds of answers you got, I suspect, from the attorney in Swampscott when you posed hypothetical zoning questions to him or her was,
it depends.
Well, yeah, it depends, and perhaps, and maybe, and I'd need to see a concrete set of plans that will cost you a lot of money to produce. You'll need to get a land surveyor. You'll need to get an architect. We'll need to determine the FAR and the boundary lines.
So instead, we just sell it for cheaper.
Instead, you just say, "Oh,"
and the homeowner gets screwed.
I can't deal with this.
Well, maybe not screwed, but
right.
And not if you're representing them, but they don't do as well as they could.
They potentially can leave money on the table. There's no doubt.
They do, but which is why it's laughable when people think that real estate development or flipping houses is so easy, so easy. Just right, everyone could do it. You just make a killing, right? Because developers are nothing but greedy pigs, right? They just roam the earth and scavenge and
screw old people,
right? And they're greedy
hoarders.
Pigs because development is so easy that anybody could do it. Well, I was like, yeah, if it's so easy, why don't you do it, right?
Well, I don't have the time.
I don't have the time
or the money.
Right? Yeah, as if every other business on the face of the earth isn't driven by the same motive,
right?
Profit. Last time I checked, we still live in a capitalist society, but
thankfully,
now.
I mean, people would love to attack that.
The only business that routinely gets accused of being driven by profit motive.
You think
the profit motive, right? Because Microsoft and Google and Meta and institutions aren't driven by profit motives.
They're in it for the NPS score.
Somehow developers just, they're greedy developers is the favorite adjective used to describe developers when people are opposed to projects.
By people that herald the American dream, do they not realize that the American dream is capitalism?
They don't. They don't.
Who are these people that are don't want anybody to make money? Everybody immigrated here for the opportunity to have a better life. Well, guess what happens when you take away capitalism? You don't have the opportunity to have a better life. It is so infuriating.
All right, I have.
Oh, sorry.
We're running up on time here, so right. I have a couple of questions just real quick. Can you just lightly touch on? I presume you're familiar with the multifamily, zoning near the T stations. Can you just talk a little bit about that and what does that mean for different communities?
Yes, back to our favorite friend, the acronym. Most of the time, those are called TODs. Transit-oriented development, otherwise known as large buildings that are built at or very close to public transportation stops, right? What a novel concept. If you've ever lived in the suburbs and you want to be a commuter and be a do-gooder and not drive your car into the city and take the commuter rail, what's the first problem you encounter when you get to the commuter rail station?
Parking.
There's no place to park your car. Right, they want people to take the commuter rail into the city to reduce the number of cars that come into the city, but you can't park at a commuter rail parking lot because there's no parking. How about this? Instead of having huge parking lots at commuter rail stations, why don't we have huge 10-story condominium and apartment buildings so people can live in these buildings and perhaps just walk downstairs and jump on the train, the T or the commuter rail, right literally.
The ferry.
Or the ferry in the lobby of their building so that they'll be able to utilize public transportation. It is.
I bet you Tokyo does that.
I bet Tokyo definitely does
a lot of dense building on public transit routes. Yes.
I think Wonderland's done a decent job of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there certainly are a lot of,
large buildings near Wonderland. Maverick.
Alewife on the...
I haven't been to Maverick
on the end of the red line.
Yeah.
Alewife used to be just vast
barren
parking lots.
Whole Foods and Jasper White Summer Shack.
Now it's just massive apartment buildings. And
Quincy's done good.
Quincy has done very good, and I'm always amazed when people remark of such buildings like, "Why would anyone want to live here? Oh my God, it's right next to the train station."
That's maybe why. Yeah.
That's why they want to live. Just like, why would anyone want to live in these large apartment buildings that you always see like right off the exit ramp of major interstates?
Like Ink Block.
Like Ink Block, right? It's remarkable. People comment, oh my God, why would you want to live right next to the expressway? Because you can walk to the red line. You can jump in an Uber and be at the airport in 5 minutes flat. You can pull out of the parking garage and get on 93 South or 93 North or Route 1 in 30 seconds.
But you'll be on 93 South for 6 hours trying to get to Quincy.
Exactly.
Every hour of the day, every day of the week.
But that's because you couldn't park your car at the train.
I'm never taking a train. Let's just be clear.
And so isn't there some...
There's a new law.
Right.
A state law that was signed by Governor Baker, which requires cities and towns to come up with plans to modify their zoning codes to specifically allow dense multifamily residential development at or near public transit stops in those cities and towns. And if they don't, then they lose funding of various sorts. And as I understand it, there's one case that has been brought against the town of Holden, which refuses to even submit its report saying how they intend to comply, which is the only stage that we're at right now, is that every city or town had to submit a report saying this is how we intend to comply at some point.
Can you imagine the Facebook posts in the Holden Town Facebook page?
We should join it.
We should.
They refuse to even submit the report saying how they intend to comply. So they have been sued by the Commonwealth, and it will be an interesting case to watch.
The Nahant one talks a lot about how much money do we actually get? Like this analysis of like, is the money worth it?
Right.
Like we'd rather not have the housing.
Are you guys close enough?
Oh yeah, there's anywhere there's a bus stop
really?
Is part of this. So
anywhere where there's a bus,
MBTA buses go through Nahant, so we're on it.
Bus, train, commuter rail, anything, and it's not just. I think it's also within a certain
mile
proximity.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty wide swatch of the Commonwealth that's covered by this law, but you know.
And they have 5 years to...
Well, large buildings coming soon to a transit-oriented station anytime soon. Right. These things take time, as they say.
I thought it was a good first step.
It's a great
first step. I wish the legislature, if you're listening, legislature, why don't you just abolish zoning, take all the rights away from the municipalities and have it be a state code? Because there's no reason that all these NIMBY idiots should be able to direct how people build.
Can we call them nidiots?
We can call them nidiots.
Yes.
New term. Heard it here first. Nidiots.
Nidiots.
Yeah.
Well, I am heartened by the proliferation of these new groups, which are the antidote to NIMBYs. Yimbys.
I follow a Yimby group on Facebook.
Is that Yes in My Backyard?
That's Yes in My Backyard.
Who bring it on.
Who advocate for increased density and increased production of housing. There is a Yimby in Boston who formerly worked at the BPDA, and she regularly appears at zoning hearings and civic group organizations on development projects, and affirmatively and very effectively, because she was in the business, advocates for the creation of more and denser housing in the city of Boston. And her voice is just so remarkably refreshing, right? And when new apartment buildings for renters are proposed, there's a lot of neighborhoods in Boston that, renters, they're transients, right? 65% of the citizens of the good city of Boston are renters. But if you propose a rental building in any neighborhood in Boston, they're immediately dismissed as transients. Right. There's going to be transients living in our neighborhood. Transients. Like 65% of the city of Boston apparently are transients because that's how many people are renters. But this Yimby advocate shows up at hearings and says,
and brings the data.
I'm a renter. In fact, I was a renter when I was an undergraduate student. I was a renter when I was a graduate student. I was a renter when I was a PhD student. I was a renter when I worked for the BPDA. And I'm a renter today. And because of the existence of rental buildings, I'm a citizen of the city of Boston. And it's just like so effective.
Bring it, sister.
Yeah. It's so effective.
We should have her on the podcast.
Yeah, we should. Who's our Yimby friend? We want to meet her.
And there's a Yimby group in Jamaica Plain, which is fascinating. Wow, that's
shocking.
To watch. It is shocking, but
you think they'd be a bunch of NIMBY idiots?
There's
limousine liberals,
and the the originator of YIMBYism apparently is from California, and in a small town.
Ironic.
And showed up at a community meeting and advocated in favor of a moderately sized.
I'm going to start showing up at meetings and just
development in her community,
testifying.
And the town manager of that town remarked that he had been doing it for like 25 years and never had anyone ever come.
Yeah, it's all the Fruit Loops that want to say no
to a meeting and testified in favor of a development project. And he was like,
no.
Oh my God, who is this woman? And she founded the YIMBY movement in California.
I think we should support a YIMBY meetup with a word, listeners. So both of you, please come. Mark, you are wicked smart, as evidenced by this entire conversation.
Thank you kindly.
The one thing that I would encourage anybody listening is if you are working with developers, if you are working with buyers in the city of Boston and you need any sort of zoning relief, that Mark is clearly your guy. You continually blow me away with your ability to comprehend dense, difficult information that, 4,000 pages of, page-turning information, I'm sure, very
and we didn't
easily
even,
read.
We didn't even talk about PDAs or IMPs.
I don't even know what public displays of affection.
Yes, we didn't talk about that yet.
We didn't talk about that.
Mark, how can people get a hold of you?
Planned development areas.
Oh, jeez.
That should be everywhere.
So I'm pretty easy to find. It's Marc with a C, M-A-R-C, Lacasse, L-A-C-A-S-S-E. And I went with obvious for my firm name, Lacasse Law, LLC. I am super easily findable on Google. You'll find my Facebook page, my law firm Facebook page, my Instagram page, Lacasse Law. I don't just talk about real estate. I'm not a one-dimensional person. I take pictures of landscaping and puppy dogs and babies and nieces and fun stuff and draw attention to myself that way. But I'm easy to find. If you just Google my name, Marc Lacasse, Boston attorney, there'll be thousands of entries that pop up linking to publications, letters to the editor that I've written over the years, perhaps a few here and
Sharing
there.
your opinions.
Sharing my
Shocking. Shocking. Cool. Brendan, you want to close us out?
Yeah. So, Mark, we like, as you know, the name of the podcast is called The Word. We like to end every interview with, what is one word that you would use to memorialize how you're going to view your next 12 months?
Optimism.
Ooh. Tell us more.
I am eternally optimistic.
About voter turnout?
About everything.
Everything.
We have to be, because if we're not optimistic, there are certainly plenty of reasons to read the newspapers every day and feel like, whoa, the end is near, as has frequently been reported. If you look at a newspaper from literally 50 years ago, or for example, I printed out like a newspaper article about the housing crisis. The Globe just published an opinion piece. 100 years of choking housing growth catches up in Massachusetts, and they published headlines from 1970, 1956, 1949, 1951. Housing crisis, housing shortage. Home builders warn of drastic housing shortage. Housing crunch, now a crisis. Housing crunch called economic threat. Those are the headlines of the past 60 years when it comes to the Commonwealth's future as it relates to housing. So, yeah, there's plenty of things to feel negative and bad about, but I like to be optimistic.
Awesome.
I love it. Well, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
Strangely, we love talking about zoning, so maybe
it's one of our favorites.
We'll rekindle it.
Thanks for having me, and I was invited to speak to a group of Northeastern undergraduate and graduate students a couple years ago, pre-COVID, when we still did things such as met with lots of people in a stadium-style an academic environment, and they invited me to come talk about Boston zoning, and I thought, really? Like, undergraduate and graduate college students are interested in hearing about zoning, and they said, yeah, it's the real estate club. We're interested in going into the real estate business and all different facets of it. And I went, and there was like 75 people in the room who had come to hear some lawyer nerd talk about Boston zoning, and they engaged.
They loved it.
And they loved it. And they asked very thoughtful, provocative questions. They understood the issues. And it gave me cause for optimism. It really did. I thought, this is amazing. These kids are so on point. So, yeah. People are interested in it because it's an important topic. And so, again, thank you for having me. And it was a delight.
Awesome. Thanks, Marc.
Thanks, Marc.